In today's video, I wanted to share 7 ideas of how you can help someone who is grieving the loss of a loved one. I am by no means an expert, but I have had experience with close ones passing away, those who have died young, died old, died fast, died slow. I mean, this is not a bragging point at all. This is more to show that, at least from my reflections and experiences with those types of different deaths, there has come changing ways of how I interact with another person. And these 7 ideas come from a place of how would I have liked someone to check up on me? What did I appreciate that people have done in the past? And how I've gone and supported other people that I think really makes a difference. So if you don't know what to do, don't worry. I'm gonna give you some ideas. I have a thing here. Okay. I have it in my iPad. Let's get cozy. I was trying to figure out if I should sit for this, but I really don't want to. So an important note before we go over these 7 ideas is you need to understand the circumstances surrounding each death, because that will impact how the grieving person responds. So the circumstances include who died and how. This is a bit important because I've generally noticed that if they've died young, those types of deaths are more harder to take and harder to accept compared to if a person died old. This is because in our minds, it's not just a loss of a person, but a loss of a potential future, an imagined future that is never fully actualized. Compared to if someone died old, usually we are able to accept those deaths a little bit better. It's still definitely hard, but it is a little bit easier because you know that the person got to experience a good portion of their life or most of their whole life, so it's a bit easier to accept. The second thing is how they died, which is, did they die quickly, slowly? Was the person involved? Did they see the death or did they just hear the death? Usually, if the person died quickly, luckily the person who heard about it or saw it will not be as traumatized. That's the best way to summarize it. So your friend or your family member that you're talking to, you at least know that they're not too traumatized by the death. In comparison, if you find out that the way the person died, either your friend or family member, we're just calling it friend for now, friend saw it with their own eyes, that's pretty traumatizing. If the person died slowly from cancer or from an illness, or, you get to see their body slowly fall apart, in that case, that friend is also very traumatized. And so you want to approach the topic of how did they pass a lot more with tact. And this also is important for the 7 ideas I'm about to share and why the context matters. Next up is you want to ask the person, or even consider, if you don't already know already, like, were they close? Was their relationship close? Because depending on how empathetic a person really is, the closer the person is, of course, that death is going to affect them deeper and longer. And that's when you know that you need to probably extend your support more delicately and provide more empathy for the person. So, how can you support someone? You can ask them, were you close? And that can reveal a lot about a person. And from there, however they answer, if they say, no, I wasn't really that close to my grandpa. And you're like, okay, well, I'm here if you ever need to talk about anything, let me know. Especially if you need me to run some errands as you attend his funeral or things like that, perfectly fine. But if that person, let's say, is close to their grandparent and you're like, were you close? And they say, yeah, we were close. And then you ask them like, oh, what was he like? You don't have to talk immediately like, how did he pass, right? But they might lightly bring it up on their own, but definitely asking a person about their memories with the person, I think, is very healing. Some people may want to talk about it, some people don't. Everyone copes differently, but be able to give them the space to remember the person, to express their feelings and emotions about hearing the news of the passing, and really just lending an ear and support is one of the best things you can do for when a loved one of yours is grieving. And lastly, the other context to consider is what phase of the grieving process is your loved one in. Based on the phase, you may act a little differently. For example, if the death is really fresh, you probably gotta act with more tact and with more delicate care. There are some things you can't talk about immediately, but if it's like a month later, a year later, 2 years later, grieving never really goes away. You just become better at it over time. The depth and pain of it, depending on the person and how they died in the relation with the person, you learn to live with it, and it dulls with time. It never fully disappears, but it manifests in different ways, and just keep that in mind, because it's still good to check in with your loved one a year later, 2 years later. Now that you can keep these things in mind, I wanted to share the 7 ideas. Number 1 is to be proactive. Invite your friend out. Probably not to go party or anything like that. It's very strange. Not very, I wouldn't say very strange, unless you guys, if that's the culture of how your friendship works. But in general, partying is usually associated with celebration, and it's kind of hard for a person who's in the middle of grieving to even feel if it's right to be celebrating at all. Instead, invite them out to everyday things, like everyday hangouts, like workouts, going to the park, maybe watching a movie, and hanging out as you guys would in any other type of days, going out for brunch and things like that, just so that they get out of the house a little bit and they're not alone with their thoughts, grieving alone. And that's not to say to ignore, the death or things like that, but to give them an escape, a temporary escape. And of course, it won't be exactly how your interactions are like prior to the death. We're not trying to fake that it's okay, but it's kind of like hanging out and letting them know, like, hey, I know you're going through a tough time. You don't need to fake being happy, things like that. I just want to be there for you, just so we can hang out. If you want to talk about it, you can talk about it. If not, it's okay. And let them be, for example, that person where maybe you guys are laughing, but they're not laughing, but they're chilling in a corner, but they're still in your company, you're still in their company, and sitting with them through that grief, I think is most important. Usually, if someone is suffering from anything in life, if you don't know what to say, sometimes things don't need to be said. Your presence itself really lets them know that, hey, I know you're suffering and you are not alone. They may not realize it at the moment. Sometimes they'll be, they won't, probably may or may not thank you for it. It's not about getting their appreciation. It's something you proactively choose to do. And most likely they will not be in a state of mind to invite you to go hang out. So you, as the friend who wants to support them, need to be proactive and invite them out to hang and continuously check in on them. They likely may or may not tell you how they feel, but you can always check up on them, like, hey, how are you doing? Hey, you want to go get some tea? Or, want to go get some coffee? It's okay if you don't. Do you want to chill at your place? Do you need some time alone, or do you want me to sit with you? Anyway, tip number 2 is to listen. Sometimes for these topics, no words are necessary. But here are some questions you can use to facilitate the listening process. You can ask, what were they like? Did you want to talk about it? What was your relationship like? Or what were your favorite memories of that person? Of course, this all depends on timing. If the person recently passed, maybe they may or may not want to talk about it. Tip number 3 is to give a big, long hug. I don't know how familiar you are with this Disneyland rule that's floating around the internet, but essentially it's that if you're giving someone a hug, you don't let go until the other person lets go. Now, it doesn't really work if both people are doing it, but at least in this circumstance, I feel like it makes a lot of sense for a grieving person that I want to hug them as long as they need it. And you'll be surprised, because once you actually hold it, there are some people who really need a very deep, long hug. And I've experienced them myself as well. I've received them and they've been very lovely. The second thing is, if you want to level up the depth of your hug game, what I have found is, instead of the kind of like patting on the back or like rubbing aggressively, those are a bit of like nervous energy, because hugging is a pretty vulnerable act. So instead, what you want to do is to just firmly press. Like a firm handshake, but a firm hug, because it feels a lot more intentional and depth. And I'm really surprised at how well the emotions and feelings of those hugs come through. That being said, I understand some people are not as comfortable with hugs themselves, and that's perfectly fine. The other thing is, if your friend is going through something that maybe an experience that you can't fully grasp or fathom, it's okay to say, like, hey, I can't imagine what you're going through right now, or I don't know how best to support you. What do you need right now? Sometimes they might know what they need, sometimes they don't, and that's perfectly fine. But a perfect example of this is one of my friends. They were telling me that they had a friend whose father is currently going through lung cancer. And let me just say, cancer's a cancer. And while my friend may not know what that experience is like, I told them, you can just literally say that you don't know what it's like. It's perfectly fine. But if I was closer to this friend's friend, to just offer like, hey, you can, refer your friend to me, because I had someone close also pass away from cancer. If they need someone to talk about that kind of experience. Also, having that camaraderie or talking to someone who's actually shared that experience before may be the best way to support as well. So referring someone to someone else who's experienced it may help. Tip number 4 is, or idea number 4 of how to support your grieving friend, is to offer to help with errands and chores. Depending on that friend's relationship with the person who passed away, they may be in great depression or really sluggish and fatigued and low energy to really be taking care of themselves. And in that case, you just coming in and offering like, hey, I dropped by with some food for your meals, or hey, are there any chores or errands I can help you with? Just being very proactive in their lives, I would be so grateful. And they may be in such a deep grief that at the time they may forget to, say thank you to you or something. But I know, looking back, at least for myself, I have never forgotten the kind support that I've received from the people around me during a time when I was grieving. Idea number 5 is check in even weeks, months, years later with that friend. Grief is something that never really goes away. It is something that a person lives with. It only dulls with time, the heaviness of it, and depending on the gravity of how that death affected them, sometimes it's something that they may not be able to talk to until years later. For example, if they saw the person die tragically in front of them, that type of traumatic thing they may not talk about until way later. Some may talk about it earlier, it depends, but you just give them the space. And also a opportunity for them to talk about their loved one, because through talking about the stories and our memories with the person, we are able to keep their memory alive, we're able to keep that person alive. And once we stop talking about them, they start to cease to exist. This is something that's quite common in a lot of cultures and religions, to have a Day of the Dead to celebrate and honor our loved ones who passed away. And it's a form of, I think, comfort and a great grieving ritual. Tip number 6 is a word of warning. While everyone copes differently, some want to talk about it, some don't want to talk about it. I say it's pretty hard to be a bad supporter, but I think the main things is to not steer your friend to doing a lot of impulsive things that could harm them and their well-being. I say this because I do know of someone where their mother passed away, and I don't know the deep circumstances of their life, right? But I did feel like they were hanging out with a group of people who encouraged their drinking and impulsive behavior after that person's mother passed away. It's quite impulsive at the time, and unfortunately that person met a unfortunate ending as well from that, which I think is such a pity. So please do not encourage your friends to do impulsive things that could threaten their livelihood and their well-being. I would say that's the only thing to not do as a supporter, as a person trying to support a friend, please. And lastly, idea and tip number 7 is, it's not easy. There's no right or wrong formula to supporting a friend. Though maybe I just might have mentioned a potential wrong way of doing it. But if you're watching this video, then I feel like you're already taking the right steps. It's that intentional effort to want to try to support someone that is most important. And I feel like your friend will definitely feel it. It doesn't have to be perfect. You still just gotta be you. They gotta be them. And if there's anything I learned is that aside from therapy, a lot of healing happens through people and other people, whether it be through community or religion or friends. Yeah, there are ways to heal alone, and it can only get you so far, and it's a very lonely process, but to have people around is just makes it so much easier. I'm hoping through this video that if I can help support you, support your friend, we can get like a whole chain going. And in my next video, I'll probably be talking about something a little bit more joyful, but I've always felt like I wanted to make this kind of video because it's such a shared and natural and definite part of the human experience that's not always often talked about, but I think it's really important. But yeah, on the topic of healing happens through people and not alone, I would really love to hear if you have any other ideas of what you like to do to support your friends. What are some things that your friends have done to support you during a rough patch? I'm definitely just one person, and I'd love to hear what you guys have to say so that maybe I can use it in the future or someone else can use it in the future, because I always think that while we always love to maybe watch something on the internet that says, wow, I wish I had a friend like that, I always also wonder, how can I be a friend like that? If you enjoy videos like these where I talk about life, relationships, please click subscribe below. I will probably be talking about a more joyful topic in the next video, but this is definitely a topic that is such a shared human experience that I've always wanted to make a video on. And so here we are. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.